All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Deborah Douglas, co-editor-in-chief of The Emancipator. Thank you. And The Emancipator is proud to host this in-person and live-streamed on YouTube event commemorating Banned Books Week. We're featuring Representative Cori and Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Now, let me tell you a little bit about The Emancipator before we get started, because we're brand new. We launched in April. We're a digital publication that reimagines the nation's first abolitionist newspapers in the United States. And just as the 19th century anti-slavery publications reframed and amplified the quest for abolition, the new Emancipator centers critical voices, debates, and evidence-based opinion to reframe the conversation on racial equity and to hasten racially just outcomes. We need some more of that, don't we? Yeah. So let me introduce our illustrious guest tonight. Congresswoman Cori is the first Black woman and first nurse to represent Missouri, and the first woman to represent Missouri's 1st congressional district, and the first activist from the movement to save Black lives elected to the United States Congress. She serves on the House Judiciary Committee, including as vice chair of the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security, and the House Oversight Committee. And she's the author of the forthcoming book, The Forerunner, A Story of Pain and Perseverance in America. It's due out October 1st. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Boston University and the founding director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research, and my boss. And he's a contributing writer at The Atlantic and a CBS News racial justice contributor. Of course, you know Dr. Kendi is the author of many highly acclaimed books, including Stamped from the Beginning, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction, making him the youngest author for that award. And he's also produced 5 #1 New York Times bestsellers, including How to Be an Anti-Racist, which you can see behind me here, Stamped, and Anti-Racist Baby, which you also can see behind me here. In 2020, Time magazine named Dr. Kendi one of the 100 most influential people in the world. He was awarded the 2021 MacArthur Fellowship, which is popularly known as the Genius Grant, and I can attest he is a genius. And his latest 2 books were an instant New York Times bestsellers, How to Raise an Anti-Racist Baby, the picture book Goodnight Racism, and actually, he just released Magnolia Flower, which is a lovely, lovely book, and you've got to read it. So, I'm going to turn the floor over to the beloved Andy Shalal, who's going to give us a welcome into this sacred space.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. It's great to be in Anacostia. Always a wonderful spot for people to gather and be together. We are a place, Busboys and Poets, a place where racial and cultural connections are consciously uplifted, which means when you come here, we want you to feel at home. We're a place where art and culture and politics comes together and intentionally collide, as we'll see what happens tonight. And we're a place for you to come here and take that deliberate pause and feed your mind, body, and soul. We believe by creating places like this, we can actually begin to transform our community and transform our city and transform the world. So thank you so much for being part of that transformation. We appreciate you. So I want to thank the Emancipator. It's hard to imagine that in this day and age, we're still banning books. Imagine, we're still banning books. And the books we're banning are generally books that make white people uncomfortable. I'm sorry. But that's the way it has to go, because this is a world that's changing. And unless we change along with it, we will continue to be living in the past that is not always the best for everybody. We want to make the world a better place for everyone. It's wonderful to have someone like Cori Congresswoman Cori She's part of the squad. Without the squad, we wouldn't have the conversations we're having today. Without the squad, we wouldn't be talking about immigration the way we talk about immigration. Without the squad, we wouldn't be talking about the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Without the squad, we wouldn't be doing a lot of stuff that is anti-racist, that is unabashedly anti-racist. So I want to give my hats off to Cori Bush, Congresswoman Cori Bush, for being such an incredible part of this growing group of young Congresspeople who are here to really make America a more perfect union. Thank you so much for all you do, Cori. And of course, Dr. Ibram Kendi, who brought the very specific way of how we need to move on beyond race. People ask, aren't we post-racial? And Dr. Kendi speaks about the idea that in order to be post-racial, we have to start being anti-racial. It's not enough to just be neutral. It's not enough to just say, I'm a good person. It is not about you, it's not about me, it's about us as a society becoming anti-racist. He was here at American University running the Anti-Racist Center here, and they stole him from us and took him to Boston University. Now it's interesting, you know, Howard Zinn, that some of you may know of, the historian who passed away a few years ago and wrote, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train, also taught at Boston University. At that time, he said, we cannot be neutral on a moving train. And we are in a moving train, make no mistake about it. And someone like Dr. Kendi is reminding us that this train keeps moving, and in order for us to be effective, to have any kind of insight about what's going on in the world, we have to not just be sitting on that train, but we have to be actively anti-racist in order for us to move this world forward. So thank you, Dr. Kendi, for all that you do. I'd like to bring our guests, Congresswoman Cori Bush and Dr. Ibram Kendi, to the front for this amazing conversation. Welcome, both of you, to Busboys and Poets Anacostia.
Wow. Thank you so much, Andy, for that introduction, that welcome. But thank you all for coming this evening. I am just truly excited to be in conversation with my sister, Congresswoman Bush, who I was telling her backstage just how much I draw power and inspiration from the fight she wages each and every day on behalf of not only her constituents back in St. Louis, but really of us all. And what's striking is we are here being hosted not only by Busboys and Poets, but also by The Emancipator. And The Emancipator is a reimagined anti-slavery newspaper. And during that anti-slavery period, there were Congresspersons who were abolitionists who were wrote off in the ways that Congresswoman Bush and others. So I just want to thank you for your service, for your struggle.
Thank you for what you do. Thank you for, how much you've inspired me. Let me tell you this, when you first put out your book, I remember a lot of the conversation about, well, why does it matter if we're anti-racist? I know we can get into that and talk about that all day, but it matters. And it matters that everybody in every single walk of life, in every single industry, in every area, do the work of anti-racism, and especially our white community, do that work. Anyway, I won't go into all of that. I know we got other stuff, but I just want to say thank you for putting it out there and making it clear and plain for people to be able to read and to grow.
Of course, and so, but tonight we're talking about people putting out books and those books being banned. Indeed, I think PEN America just came out with a report on Monday, and they found that there were more books banned this past year and challenged than at any than any year since they've been recording that
Yeah.
data. And so I think I first, Congresswoman Bush, I want us to talk about what we think is the source of this. Like, where do you think this is coming from? Why do you think people are engaged in such a mass effort to take books by people like Toni Morrison and others, out of libraries and out of children's hands?
One thing that we're seeing is this this push to be this push where hatred is okay, this push where we need to normalize hatred. We're seeing, but we're also seeing the tactics of old. This is an old tactic of oppression that goes all the way back. We think about it's global one, but when we even just think about going back to slavery, when black folks weren't allowed to read. Not only were you not allowed to read, you were brutalized if you were found reading or found to be able to read. So. Just where it's coming from, I think now this big push, because in that same report, they talked about how just a couple years ago, it was just a couple hundred books that were being challenged or banned. And now we're up to there were a couple hundred challenges happening. Now we're up to nearly 800 challenges, over 700 challenges just up to August of this year. So it's multiplying, and the reason why is if folks can keep us ignorant, if folks can keep you from understanding what happened before and how you get free, if people can keep you from knowing what freedom feels like and what it's like, also, if I don't want you to know my ish, the best way for me to cover it up is for me to keep it from you, keep you from being able to see it. And that's one thing that really drives me crazy right here in this United States is I feel like we have a history of throwing rocks and hiding our hands. I feel like this country, and I say it all the time, like if you do it, like stand up and do it with your whole chest and like be able to like stay with that thing. If you do it, like stand up for it. But we don't have that. We think about our government and how, okay, well, yeah, these things happen, but we don't want to talk about that. Like, no, we don't want anybody to know. Nah, what happened in Tulsa in 1921. What happened in East St. Louis, that massacre in 1918, that happened where they was just pissed off at black folks gaining prosperity or the idea of it, killing off whole communities of people. And so if they can stop us from knowing that history, they can repeat it.
Exactly, and I think this is something that's been happening from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, the first texts, the first books to be banned in this country were abolitionist texts. I'm reminded of David Walker. Of course, I live in Boston, and he wrote this appeal to the colored citizens of the world in 1829, and he urged enslaved people to nonviolently or even violently throw off the yoke of slavery, and he stitched this appeal into the clothes of sailors going south so it can get onto plantations and other places, and slaveholders in Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama and other places, when they found out about this appeal, they started banning it. And they started, of course, trying to even get the mayor of Boston to arrest David Walker. And of course, Uncle Tom's Cabin was banned. And of course, during the civil rights era, I should say during the Jim Crow era, if you were a teacher in Florida, if you were a teacher in Alabama, even if you were a teacher in places like Michigan and others, you couldn't teach anti-racist books. And so there's a long history of book banning. If anything, we have more of a history of book banning than a history of free expression. And it just so happens, though, I think that in recent years, when particularly after the brutal murder of George Floyd, and we started demonstrating from coast to coast. And actually in June of 2020, 76% of Americans were polled as saying racism exists and is a huge problem. 51% of white Americans were polled as saying racism exists and a huge problem. The first time on record that a majority, slim majority, of white Americans were identifying racism as a problem. So Americans were commonly recognizing racism as this existential threat. And part of that was due to the work that writers and activists had been doing on the ground for years, since the murders of people like Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and others. And so in many ways, this book banning is the latest effort for people to think that the existential threat is not racism, it's those people who are talking about racism. That the existential threat is not sexism, it's the people who are writing on sexism. The existential threat is not transphobia, it's those trans kids. I mean, and it's this just vicious backlash.
And anything that would be a threat to the structure of white supremacy and white patriarchy, that's what they want to stop that. And so we see, if we look at what the books that are, like what they're banning, books about LGBTQ plus issues, or from authors, books about racism, and books that are considered sexually explicit. All of those in some way threaten the structure of white supremacy. It threatens to uphold this idea of, because if you think about it, interwoven in that, you can see that great replacement theory. You can see, it's just, so the point is that white supremacy, out of this, white supremacy must reign in their eyes. And it takes me back to the day that I was sitting in the US Capitol on January the 6th. And what I never thought I would see, not only in my lifetime, but definitely not while I was there, people breaching the doors of the Capitol and this takeover of the US Capitol, people scaling walls. And I just think about, had that been us, like, I can't name the amount of protests I've been in or the protests I've organized over the years. I'm a Ferguson activist. I hit the ground when Michael Brown was killed, and I've been on the ground ever since. And could that have been us? Absolutely not. You would not see any of us scaling a wall. You would not see us beating up, killing police officers, and that you would not see us with our feet up, propped up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. You would not, none of that would have happened. But because white supremacy was trying to be upheld, it felt threatened, those things were able to happen.
Yeah, I remember on that day, while the insurrection was happening, I called my mother, who's a longtime minister, Christian woman, and I asked her, what do you think would be happening right now if those folks would have been black? And without pause, she said, they'd all be dead.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've been beaten for less. We've been arrested for less. I remember one day at a protest in Ferguson, I remember I was helping a woman who we thought was having a heart attack, and the police grabbed me, threw me up in the air. I just remember, I didn't even know I was floating. I didn't even know I was thrown up in the air till I saw stars and wondering why the stars are getting closer to my face. And then I started to come down, and it was when I started to come down and I hit the ground that I really realized what happened. We have been brutalized and hurt and shot at for much, I'm sorry, I keep saying much worse, much less.
And I think in many ways, people don't know that. And I think people don't know that largely because of this history of book banning, of censorship. And I can only remember when I was a young person, particularly when I was a teenager, like I didn't read. Like, I wasn't much of a reader when I was in high school because many of the books that were put in front of me, I didn't see myself. I didn't understand, like, they weren't relevant for me and to me. And you know, Congresswoman Bush, your personal story, in many ways, is so powerful. And I can only imagine how there are girls and women who have experienced or are experiencing what you've experienced in your life, and because they aren't necessarily reading books where they're seeing other people experience that too, and they're seeing reading books or books are being banned that are talking about the structures and sort of the racism and sexism that's behind it, possibly they could be thinking the problem is them.
That's right.
And so if you could even speak about even your own personal story and how personal story is so critical to liberation.
Yeah, you know, I understand that not everybody is able to, not everybody wants to, and it's okay if they don't. Some people don't want to speak about their story, and that's okay. But for those that feel compelled to, when we tell our stories, other people are helped and other people are able to see themselves. Just like you, I didn't see myself when they made us read Huckleberry Finn. I didn't see myself when I was made to read the Odyssey and books like that. I didn't see myself, and there weren't books presented before me where I did. But I think about how, you know, just as I speak about my story, when I talk about living in my car with my 2 babies and just not being able to go to sleep because it was so cold in the car, I didn't want to sleep and wake up and one of my babies was dead. You know, I couldn't sleep and I still had to get up and go to work the next day. And I think about how being so hungry at one point in time that I was feeding my children. I remember I fed my kids for a week and I didn't eat myself. You know, going through all of those things, all the times that I was brutalized by an intimate partner, one time choked out and left for dead. He thought I died, but he left me because he thought I was dead. And I woke up, like, I think the next day. And so I'm still here. But people need to know that even though you go through those things, even though trials and tribulations, adversity, whatever it is, even though the oppression and so much of that, I feel I lived and walked through because of the policy violence that is allowed and has happened in this country from our government. But people need to know that you can still rise. You are still valued. You're still worth. You're still amazing. You can still do great things. And so that's why I tell so much of my story. That's why I'm vulnerable about it. I'll tell when I'm running for office, I say, nobody has to tell my ish. I'll tell it for myself. Like, I'll tell what I did because somebody is helped by that. And I think about how just hearing the stories of others. I remember hearing a story talking to Dr. Angela Davis one day, and her sister Fania, and they told me this story. Now, it's a story that maybe one day will be in a book, but they told me this story about how Fania became an attorney. And her story was, I became an attorney because my sister was locked up when they arrested my sister. And I was like, I need to get my sister out of prison. I need to get my sister out of jail. So she decided if she's not out of jail by the time I'm able to, like, either way, I'm going to be her lawyer. But just having that vision, like, even now, like, that's the story those are the stories that we need to hear. I think about Assata Shakur, and I think about what she went through out there and when that situation happened, and, you know, I won't go all into it, but just to be there in that moment, and she's hoping to hold on to her own life. You know, I read that in her autobiography, and just reading that, I was able to see myself because I saw, feeling like, hey, the police see this black woman. When they tossed me up, they saw a black woman. They saw black, they saw threats. You know, I could identify with what happened to her on the ground.
Wow, and I'm just sitting here even reflective of how to ban books is to ban treasures.
Yeah.
When I think of what I have more than anything, in my home, I probably have more books than anything. And then when I think of what regular folks have access to, whether through their public library or their own sort of personal library, it's books. I mean, books are treasures. And they're not just sort of treasures that reveal wisdom. They're treasures for that person who isn't able or doesn't have the ability to travel around the world. But they can travel around the world and through time, through books. I mean, it's a democratizer. But I also think, as you mentioned, that there's just something beautiful about the power of seeing your own story in the mirror through a book, and then also seeing the differences.
Yeah.
There's just something affirming. There's something, there's this connective tissue that allows human beings really to connect. And then I think the other side of this, for me, particularly someone who studies social movements, is the role of political education.
Yeah.
Right? In organizing. And political education programs, the foundation of those are books. And those types of books are the ones that are being banned. Those are the types of books that it's making it hard for our young people, even our older people, to get access to.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to sort of mention, for me, just how critical books are as this sort of people's treasure.
Yeah.
And I think that's precisely why they're being ostracized and demonized and banned.
Yeah, and the one thing about a book is, one of my favorite things to do is go to a bookstore. Like, I love going to a bookstore. I don't know. There's something about walking into a bookstore. It's just like, I don't know. You just feel life. I don't know what it is, but I go into a bookstore and I'll just walk around. And when I go to a different city, I try to go find the bookstores that are not like the big box stores. And I'll go and sometimes I'll just sit and just go through the books. I always come home spend way too much money. But
all this stuff in the luggage.
Right. Well, look, let me tell you, I probably have about 30 books that I've purchased over the last 2 months, and because I'm in Congress, I don't have time to read any because the bills are like this. But I, thinking about, like, even as a child in school, there were only a few books that we were allowed, and I don't know if it was the school or if it was the state. I don't know which one dictated that at that time. But at home, my dad had the books. At home is where I learned about our true Black history. At home is where I learned more about, and this is no diss. Let me just say, but at school we learned about Michael Jordan, Oprah Winfrey, and Dr. King. At home, I learned about Kwame Ture. I learned about Stokely Carmichael. Just say it that way. I learned about so many others that I never would have learned about at school. We had to read the books over and over again, and then tell my dad about the books. And so, but that was taught to me at home. What I didn't realize were seeds being sown to later blossom up into something. And so now I have that foundation. I have that foundation when I go and I read other books, and I'm able to say, or, but as books are being banned now, the more books that are being banned now, we're taking that away. And what happens to our because this big push against our LGBTQ authors, what happens to our youth that need to read those books, that need to see themselves? What happens? Because the other thing is, right now, what's happening is, especially to our trans youth, the way that they're being treated in their schools. How do they get that support? They may not be able to get it from the adults in their life. They may not be able to get it at school, but they can get it in a book. So banning those books is, taking away. That's a form of control that we can't allow.
Exactly, and I remember speaking about at home, my parents, when I was in elementary school, would buy me all these biographies of black leaders.
Yeah.
And I remember for third grade, for Black History Month, because of course it was the only time in school we were talking about African American history, but our teacher asked us to do some sort of talk on a black leader. And I actually chose Martin Luther King. But the reason why I was able to choose King, because I had a biography of King at home, right? And the irony is the people who are banning books today are both praising King and banning his books. But that's an aside. And so I remember giving this speech in class, and at one point I said that King fought for the lives of black people. And the teacher cut me off and was like, no. King fought for the lives of all people.
I knew that was coming.
So they were all life mattering us, like even back in the early 90s. And of course, so that teacher and I, we had been going at it all year long. I had already done a one boy sit-in in the chapel because she wasn't calling on one of my black friends. So I just shouted back, no, King fought for the lives of black people. And of course, I had to go home and ask my parents, was I right? But I mean, to me, but the foundation of that were those books.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fascinating thing about a book is if you read it today and you put it on your shelf and you don't go back and pick it up for 10 years, it's the same book. Like the information, it's the same information.
It's not
it
like
does
a
not
person.
change. Right. And but it's fascinating because if this is something that moved me, it's the same thing that can move my grandchildren. It's the same thing that can teach them. It's the same truth. And that's the thing that they want to snatch from us. But I am so glad that we have organizations and groups and then even like the emancipator who are willing to speak out against the banning of books. When we look about how that has affected us, just globally, we think about if there is a country, if China says we're not about democracy, any book that's pro-democracy, they're banning. Books that say that you can speak for yourself and that you can advocate for your community and that you deserve, your human rights. So at this point, in my own state, there's this big book banning happening. And it's been fierce for the last year and a half. One thing though that really got to me recently. Now, there is a bill. It's called the Holocaust Education Bill, I believe is the name, in my state. That bill was passed a few months ago to mandate teaching the Holocaust in all of our schools, which we should. Absolutely. We absolutely should. Teach the truth about it. Teach the truth. Not the watered down version, not the sanitized version. Teach the truth. But at the same time this was happening, there was a coordinated effort around the state against critical race theory. School board meetings, it was violence against CRT, and they named it. And even in our state, this political party, they said our number one thing to work on for this next year is bringing down critical race theory. Now, I don't know of any schools in any elementary or middle schools, high schools in my community that teach critical race theory. But what you're really saying is you want to make sure that Black history is not taught. That you want to make sure that we don't talk about slavery because some of the books call us immigrants. We worked voluntarily for low wages. If they want to keep that information, I don't understand why. Well, actually, I thought about it earlier, and I think part of that is this. The Holocaust didn't happen on U.S. soil. So we can say, oh, they were bad and we did good. We did good. So we want to support. Slavery happened on U.S. soil. It happened at the hands of the U.S. government. Tulsa happened with the okay of the government. So many of these, St. Bernard Parish. So don't tell anybody, let's not talk about, let's ban that. Because we don't want people to know, we don't want people to be hurt by that because we did a wrong thing. We did a wrong thing that we continue to benefit from. That we continue to allow to cause us to grow and oppress others, but let's not talk about it.
Yeah, and it was fascinating how there have been all these attempts to discredit, to misinform the public about writers who are producing these books, but that failed. And so what's the other alternative? You can't convince the public that these books are harmful. You can't convince the public that these books are inequitable. You can't convince the public that these books are anti-white. So we just need to ban them outright. We've lost the argument. We continue to lose the argument. And so that's all we can do, is ban books. And what's striking, though, is the argument that these books are harmful to white children. These books make white kids feel uncomfortable. And last I checked, those same white kids, since they claim to care about white kids, because personally, I don't even think they care about white kids.
Let me tell you.
So we know they don't care about kids of color, because they never talk about kids of color. So that's guaranteed, but they don't even care about white kids. Because if they cared about white kids, they would actually acknowledge that white kids are being targeted by white supremacists online. They would acknowledge that these white kids are facing all these DMs from white supremacists, that they're being targeted with memes, that white supremacists are jumping on their multiplayer video games, that these organizations from the Proud Boys and others are specifically targeting these white youth. And they would say, you know what? How are these white kids going to be able to recognize white supremacist ideology if we don't ever talk to them about it?
That's right.
And so maybe we should actually teach them about this ideology so they can protect themselves. But no, what do? They leave them vulnerable to being preyed on by these white supremacist organizations by removing the text that can allow these kids to understand it. And then all the while they claim they care about these white kids. Yeah. I mean, that's been part of the problem throughout American history, that many of these policies, many of these racist policies have been put forth as if even if they were going to benefit white people, but many working poor and working class white people have been harmed too.
Yeah.
And they don't see it, and then they're supporting their own destruction.
That's so true. But allowing all of the misinformation and disinformation that comes from those groups online, allow it. There's no real pushback online from that. We see all the time this growing number of those who feel like they have been left out by society, or they're the ones who are at risk. And that number of white supremacists continues to grow. And not just in the South. We can't blame this on the South. This is happening all over the country. And so when we look at the book banning, for the number to increase by so much, last year a record was broken for the amount of books that were banned and restricted. This year, we're already on pace to break that record. And the thing is, we have authors. We have amazing authors with insight. We're talking about people who are speaking a truth that they weren't able to speak before, that have the freedom to be able to write, and have the freedom of publishers actually, where people aren't self-publishing necessarily, which is nothing wrong with self-publishing, I get. But where this information is able to get out, and then we're smacking people's hands for wanting to read it. And look at what's happening to our librarians. Teachers and librarians are at risk for jail time, like actual jail time, if they present one of these books to one of the children, to one of the students. Jail time.
Jail time for introducing a book about police violence,
Yes.
or about racism to a 15-year-old black child who, according to studies, is facing 5 instances of racist discrimination per day.
Period.
And that child not understanding what's happening to them. And I know when I was growing up in Jamaica, Queens, and I was being followed by the police, and I was being brutalized, and people were looking at me as dangerous, I actually started to think, well, maybe I am dangerous. Mm-hmm. Maybe there is something wrong with me, because nobody was teaching me something different. And so a teacher who is seeking to do her job, right, is being criminalized. I mean, we're in a state, aren't we?
And it's not that our teachers don't have enough already. You know, we're talking about 138 school districts in 32 states in this country that are pushing restrictions and bans. 138 school districts. That's millions of kids that are affected by this, and this is only the beginning. Folks are more emboldened. Folks are feel that they have Congress for sure on their side, and other elected officials across the country to continue to do this. And so we can only expect for the numbers to grow even more next year.
Indeed, and so I think we are going to transition to questions, and we have Deb, the EIC of the Emancipator, who's going to facilitate.
Mm-hmm. Testing, hello?
All right.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you so much for such a phenomenal conversation so far. I'm sure that there are some people in this vast crowd who have questions, so if you'd like to come up to the front. If I can, okay, he's gonna fix it for me, okay. Take a handful of questions, so if you'd like to come up and line up behind this gentleman, maybe 3 or 4 questions, and I'll hold the mic.
My name is Melvin Foote. I'm the president of the Constituency for Africa. My question is, a lot of these issues that we're dealing with are global. I mean, if you go outside of, black people are not just catching hell in America, we're catching hell globally. So what do you say to that? I mean, are we only dealing with our problem, or are we dealing with the problems of African people globally?
Thank you, sir.
I would say that our work in Congress is global. We work every day on global issues. We work every day actually with leaders and activists all over Africa. Not only in Africa, I just came back from Colombia, Honduras, and I met with the Afro-Colombians there. I met with Mexico. I met with the Afro-Mexicans there, and I talked with them about like what they're experiencing and what it looks like. I talked to them about what it's like to be considered indigenous, but also where you're still not, considered. You're not looked at like a whole person. They still suffer that oppression, and how the U.S. can help, and what we can do from as Congress to be able to help like advocate for them and further, like really be able to lift their voices. So that's something that is an ongoing thing. But as we're talking about banned books, that's something that personally that I have not worked with in Africa, but we have a subcommittee. Our foreign relations committee has a subcommittee. Yeah, but there is a Africa subcommittee, and so that would fall up under that committee.
How do we deal and confront white supremacy when half of America is basically delusional at this point with Republicans? So how do we deal with that, and how do we combat that?
Thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
How do we deal and combat white supremacy when half of America is basically being delusional and still
When
believing in a
America's being
stolen
delusional.
election?
You said, how do we come back from that?
Well, I think it's important for us to understand that delusion is a product of being racist. Indeed, the heartbeat of being racist is denial, is to be deluded. And you're not just deluded about this idea that black people, whether in the United States or around the world, are inferior. You're not only deluded that the cause of disparities and injustices you imagine to be what's wrong with those people as opposed to these larger structures, you're even deluded in thinking you're, quote, not racist. You're even deluded in imagining that you're not the problem. You're actually deluded in imagining you're the victim. Indeed, some studies are showing that the majority of white Americans are imagining that they are the primary victims of racism, even though by almost every measure, white people are on the higher end of almost every racial disparity. That's a delusion.
Question?
Yeah, hi, my name's Carly. Sorry. Is this good? Yeah. Oh, okay. Hi, Mr. Ibram Kendi. I'm a huge fan. I'm from Boston.
Shout out to Boston.
Yeah. I heard you speak at the Harvard Legacy of Slavery, the whole consortium, and I was really moved by your words. So I'm really happy to be here. And Representative Bush, I'm so excited to see you speaking here too. And I just bought your books, Mr. Kendi, and I was wondering, Representative Bush, if you could give us a little preview of The Forerunner.
Oh gosh. So she asked if I could give you all a preview of The Forerunner, which is my book that will be released on October 4th. It is my story. It's a lot about my story. It's a lot about the brutality, the abuse that I endured, but also how that relates to why, like the policies that I push now and why I push for them the way that I do. Because I get a lot of backlash about, like, you're doing too much, or why are you pushing so hard? And I'm like, because I still feel that police officers boot on my face. Like, I can remember what that feels like. I remember what it felt like to be so hungry that I had thoughts that no one should ever think. Trying to figure out how to get money to be able to take care of my kids. So that's what it's that, but then it's like, this is why I fight the way that I fight. And like I talked about earlier, like, even though we go through stuff, like you still value. People wanted to throw me away, but some of those folks wanted to throw me away, and now I'm their congresswoman.
And it's titled The Forerunner.
The Forerunner.
And it's dropping October 4th.
October 4th.
But you can pre-order tonight.
Into the mic.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, welcome to Ward 8 and Ward 7, where 48% of the people that live here read below the first grade level. And so when you talk about banned books, that hits close to my heart. But my real question is, I'm going to give you a fluff question. When you talk about oppression, when you talk about banned books, and when you talk about all of the things that have really taken away our voices, Queen Elizabeth II, that was all over the news. I want to hear what you all have to say about all of that, and all the way, and the way that just goes right back to where we are, where 48% of the people here, where you are sitting, can't read below the first grade level. And the Queen, all we saw was Queen Elizabeth II died. I just want to hear what both of you all have to say, and thank you.
So
Well, first they should look at the homepage of the Emancipator, because we addressed this. We recentered the conversation this week. theemancipator.org. Okay.
Yes, plug it.
And I would just say, intrinsic in your question is your observation about how much we talked about that funeral, her passing, and I didn't talk about it at all, because I think the issue that you raised, to me, is a much more serious issue that we need to be talking about.
Meghan Markle looked fly at the funeral, but also, there were so many people that I saw say, who is that? Now, I think that that's indicative of another thing, because some people were like, well, like, she's never affected, like, I don't know, what has she done for us? But then there were other folks saying, there was a lot of conversation about, like, why are we propping up someone who was, the matriarch of this long-standing regime that colonized, so many countries, and the devastation and the plundering. So that was, but as you talk about, what's happening right here, I think that if we're doing the work to realize that and to bring that forward, I don't know how many people know that. Would you say 40% under first 48% in DC or your ward? Yeah, well, as long as we keep that information and we don't put that information out, I think that's one of the things that is hurtful to our communities. I'm glad you said that, because when we don't even know that that's happening in our communities, we can't do better. That's something that should be plastered around, and now this is a way that we can help fix that. But if we don't make communities safe enough for people to say, hey, I need that help, because also, and I'm gonna shut up on this point because we got other folks, but also that's also the reason why we have folks that are missing out on so many resources, because of the reading level. And when it's time to show up to to fill out some paperwork for resources, when it's time to get the social services money or that help, if we are not making a safe space for people to say, I can't fill this out, and I know because I'm a nurse and I worked in community health, that was a job of one of our nurses, was to sit down and to work to help to make sure that people were able to access that we're having, that we're having issues with literacy.
And what's striking, Congresswoman, is when that person doesn't want to share that I can't fill this out, because they imagine that their peers, that person is going to say, well, what's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you? Yes.
as opposed to what's wrong with your the
yes.
policies that
Yes.
led to you not having this ability.
Absolutely.
Like, why are we so often problematizing people?
Right.
You know, as opposed to what they're facing.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight, Congresswoman. With the Congressional Black Caucus having 50-plus voting bloc, I never see them hold up a bill to attach something that will address issues like what the young man said about literacy in this city. So my question is, Stacey Abrams was asked this question a couple of months ago in the interview. Why do politicians, this is for both of you, it's a political question though, why do politicians, when they refer to groups of people, they never individually say, okay, I'm trying to get intangibles for the black community. It's always a bundle. I'm trying to get tangibles for people of color. I'm trying to get tangibles for minorities. Why is it, Stacey Abrams said that it's offensive to say, I'm trying to get tangibles specifically for the black community. You have to bundle it up with others, saying minorities or people of color. So that goes back to my first comment. The CBC has a 50-plus voting bloc, right? They need to, that's power. If the Tea Party had 50-plus voting bloc, they will be answering to their constituents, right? So we expect the CBC, your constituents, right, your colleagues, why is it offensive to say that I'm getting something specifically for the black community?
So I think that also may be more about where you represent or where you're trying to represent, because that is that may be her reality, which is fine, and that is the reality of many. But for me, it's not my reality. I am very specific. When I'm going after something, I'll say this is for the black community. I'll say this is for the indigenous community. This is for our LGBT community. This is for our Afghan refugees. This is for, like, I have no problem with that. But when we, but that's my community, because my community, the way that my community is set up, I'm not running for governor is a whole different thing, because, you know, you have, you know, it's just different. My community, and so anyway, when you're dealing with a district versus when you're dealing with the entire state, you have to look at that differently, because you will alienate people. But as far as the congressional, so I support what she's saying. It's just it's two different things. It's like apples and oranges. But as far as the Congressional Black Caucus, we are an affinity caucus, not an ideological one. And so we are caucus because we're black, but we have varying views and varying priorities, because there may be a black person as that Congress member, but they might have a predominantly white district that they serve. Or predominantly Latino district that they serve. And so that is the other thing with that. So it's something that's a priority with me. Like for me, because I serve the district where Michael Brown was killed and all of the protests and all of that, my biggest thing is always going to be looking at the criminal legal aspect of something, criminal legal reform. Like, I push that, you know. But that's not every black person's big push, because some of those communities don't face it like I do. My community is #1 for police murder every single year for almost a decade. So it's different for me. So that's part of it. It's not that we don't come together as a caucus. It's just that our districts are so different to where the priorities are different. And so we're all trying to work for our priorities and still, you know, try to come together as like being black. But we are able to get stuff done that as it relates to black folks. We work hard as a group to try to get that done. It's still just not enough of us. That 50 plus is good, but it's still it's just not enough of us.
And you know, I would say that you're speaking, when we actually look at the history of black elected officials and even black activists more broadly. Historically, Black activists, Black even elected officials, have won bills, have waged movements that benefited the United States, have benefited so many different groups of people. And it's striking because those other folks who now have rights, who have abilities, who have opportunities, who are even here because of the struggles of Black people, because of the struggles of Black elected officials, because of the struggles of Black activists, aren't necessarily recognizing that, are engaging in anti-Blackness. But what I'm speaking to is this is what's, to me, beautiful about Black people in this country. How long we've not only fought for Black people, but we fought for equality, and we fought for justice. And so I think that that's one of the ways we can understand this. But it's an interesting sort of question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy. I'm a new to Anacostia.
Hi, Tracy.
And I'm a retired high school principal from Detroit, Michigan.
All right. Shout out to the teachers.
So now that we are just a few blocks from Frederick Douglass's home here in Anacostia, I want to applaud your authenticity and your bravery for continuing to speak out and speak truth to power.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So as a former educator, are there policies, are there some laws on the books to support teachers and educators? Because I didn't have this issue when I was a principal. I did what I needed to do for my kids. I taught them what I thought they needed to be taught. But now my colleagues don't have that anymore. And I think you may know about South Lake, Texas. This ban, this fervor around critical race theory is nothing but a Republican strategy to rally people up just like they did when those kids tried to go to school in Arkansas, tried to integrate, or we tried to bus in Detroit. What is available right now to protect educators and, of course, authors?
That fight is, I believe, in like 3 places, because you have that fight on the local level, you have that fight on the state level, and then the federal level. On local levels, it's just going to depend on where you live, that and state. But some of us live in states where we don't have the support. Our teachers don't have the support of that government. Some of us live in states where they're pushing for the banning of books. And so that support is not there. On the federal level right now, I can honestly not think of anything that's on the books yet as far as something being introduced. But that doesn't mean that something is not coming. Let me just tell you, we got a lot of stuff in the hopper. It's just, when stuff is able to be introduced. So, but I will check on that, because if there is nothing, maybe that's something that we need to do. So where's my team? Yeah. And I'm serious. But you know what? That's how it happens. That's how it happens. Somebody says, hey, this is what we need. We listen to the community. And so if that's not something that's being worked on, then, I'm definitely willing to do that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Natalie Betts. I'm a sophomore college student at Howard University.
Okay.
And I'm...
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm also a campus reporter for the Hilltop Student News publication. So my question was, as a student As a student at an HBCU with the banning of books targeting marginalized groups, as people in your positions, how do you guys propose our generation combating the censorship happening today?
Combat what?
The censorship happening today.
Well, first, let me just say to you, I was a reporter at the FAMU when I was in college, and actually my first published piece was in my HBCU student newspaper. And so, 10 years, I'm gonna be looking for your book in Busboys. But I think that college students in particular, particularly HBCU students, have historically been at the forefront of really fighting every major anti-racist battle in this country's history. And I think that certainly Howard students and other students around this city can be organizing not only banned book clubs, but they could be figuring out ways to organize with teachers, organize with parents, organize against school district leaders. They can be figuring out, using their research skills to figure out who exactly is banning each book, right? They can be figuring out what are the leverage points to pressure that person to stop. And so I think college students in particular have a tremendous amount of power, have a long history of activism. And actually when I think of this movement to defend teachers, as the sister just said, this movement to defend librarians, this movement to defend young people, I've actually been looking for college students to stand up and to organize. And I think it can be Howard students at the forefront of that.
And the power of the alumni. Like, let's not forget the alumni. Work with the alumni, organize with the alumni, and then also because the alumni, they got a network. They got folks because they all over the place. And when we think about, you got to think about what HBCUs hold. HBCUs turn out the most doctors, lawyers, judges, and so on, teachers, nurses, over and over. So use that network, and also you can talk to us. When Howard students reached out and said, we have this issue happening on our campus, and I'm not going to go into what the issue was. We have this issue on our campus, we need help. Myself, Representative Ayanna Presley, it was cold outside. We was like, are y'all sure today? But we showed up. We showed up because we said, you called us. We may not be your representative, the representative of that particular district, but you belong to us. We serve you. We still represent you. We need you to grow and prosper and thrive. And so if this thing is standing in your way, we can, and you reached out to us, we need to show up. So that's the other thing. You reach out to the Congress members and state officials and whoever that you can get to let them know, like, hey, how can we organize together? Because you need people in every place, in every level. You need those that will stand with you. And it's about who has that bully pulpit. So you need some folk with the bully pulpit, you need some folks that network, and you need some folks with some money. All right.
All right, last question. Can you hear me? Oh, hi. First of all, I want to say hello to my homegirl. My name is Robin Proudy. I know you heard of that name. My sister is your colleague, Representative Rachel Proudy.
Rachel Proudy.
Well, I live here now, but I'm moving back to St. Louis. I just retired, 30 years, federal government and military. My family, as you may know, I don't know if Rachel spoke to you about that, we recently was contacted by the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, who told us that we were enslaved, our ancestors were enslaved by St. Louis University.
Oh.
So I have formed the descendants of the St. Louis University enslaved, and some of the reasons that really motivated us to kind of organize and come together, not only to commemorate and honor our ancestors for helping to build and sustain St. Louis University, was because of this movement of, banning this history, not talking about this history. We are the living embodiment of this history, of what happened, and we want to be acknowledged for African Americans all over the world for our contributions. And when they ban these books and when they don't want to tell these stories, that is what happens. You are trying to erase our history, our legacy, for not only contributing to every facet of America and the world, but also is just denying us the opportunity to not only move beyond slavery, because we were way more than slaves, but so my question is twofold. First of all, being in Congress, do you know what's going on with the H.R. 40 legislation? I know that in March, it was passed in the House, I believe. So what is going on? Are you privy to what's going on with that legislation?
Yeah, so H.R. 40, for the first time in 40 years, finally passed out of the committee. H.R. 40 is the bill that is a resolution for the study of slavery. It's the study of reparation, the study for reparations. That's what it is. It's the study for reparations, to study what that could look like, how we could go about it. It took 40 years for this to be voted out of the committee, and now...
You're saying it took 40 years just to approve the study?
40 years to approve the study, but just out of the committee.
Just out of the committee.
It hasn't come to the floor yet to vote on for the whole House of Representatives. So we haven't gotten there yet. We are still pushing. The author now, which is Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, she has been pushing really, really hard. I work with her. She's my chairwoman. I'm her vice chair of the crime committee in Congress on judiciary, the Judiciary Committee. We're pushing hard to get that to move, but also there is also legislation that our office is about to introduce coming soon. It's a reparations bill. It's actually a full reparations bill. So hers is the study, mine is what reparations could look like. Give us cash, give us money to help us for money for housing, money for small business, the capital for small businesses, healthcare and education, putting money into HBCUs so we can go for free, et cetera, et cetera. So it's so that's coming. But that's where we are. The issue is not everybody is just not on board still with the study about reparations, because it still makes people feel uncomfortable, because it says that something bad happened in this country, this land of the free, home of the brave.
Right, and I want to also say, Mr. Kendi, Stem from the Beginning was a masterpiece. And, my question, I just had to tell him that, give him his props, okay? So also, my other question is, I would like to meet with you about the reparations bill in St. Louis. You're going to do that in St. Louis, right? Is that what you're talking about?
The bill will be introduced here, but we will have a St. Louis event when we get ready to, we're doing it up. But that, it makes me think about, I'm sorry, that makes me think about, when you were talking about the banning of the books and like what happens, I think about how my grandfather, and I spoke about this on the House floor one day. I talked about how after I gave this speech, so my grandfather, my mother's father, he served in World War II. He was discharged, came home back to South Carolina. Within a short period of time, he was said to have looked upon a white woman. The Klan was coming for him. This is the story that we were told. The Klan was coming for him. He hopped on the first bus to St. Louis, which was where his buddy that he served with in World War II lived, and that happened to be my grandmother's brother, and so that's where I came from. And a similar thing happened to another one of my grandparents. But I think about when I told that story and I talked about, hey, like they messed up my grandfather's last name when he went into the military and didn't care to fix his name. And so that messed up our family after that because we have this new name because they just decided not to fix his last name, even though he said, hey, that's not how you spell my name. But the thing about that is this, when I said, the thing is, that was never our name in the first place. Like my ancestors didn't come from Nigeria. They didn't come through the Middle Passage. They didn't come that transatlantic slave trade with that last name. This last name came from, we know, from the slave owners that owned my ancestors. And I had people reach out and say, I never heard that before. Where did you get your last name? What do you mean? The amount of people who reached out. And so that's one thing about banning of books, because it's that history that's vitally important. It's important to who we are. That is who we are. You know, it's what happened to us, and that should not be erased. It should not be silenced. It happened, and we walk through that every single day. And not only that, that is going to be the legacy of our children's children, because it's who we are. And so to ban those books that would actually speak to that and tell that true history is egregious.
It is. And Congresswoman Bush, I think we've also talked about how you can see your story in other books. And what's fascinating is my grandfather, who also was in World War II, and came home to Georgia and was run out of Georgia by white segregationists and went up to New York. And so, you know, I would be reading your story, you'd be reading out my story, and, you know, and we'd see ourselves and can connect and recognize the power of our shared history. And I think, again, that's the power, you know, of books, because it allows us to recognize our shared humanity. Because when you recognize a shared history, you're recognizing the shared humanity.
Thank you. We couldn't have done this without all of you in this room today. We couldn't have done this without you, Congresswoman Bush, you, Dr. Kendi. And we like to keep the conversation going. The Emancipator is everywhere. The Emancipator is everywhere you are. We're on social media right now. If you go to _Emancipator, you can follow us on Twitter and follow us on Instagram right now. And of course, come to theemancipator.org, where we are not uncomfortable talking about reparations. There's actually some really interesting research coming out of Harvard. Cornell William Brooks is pioneering some research on whether or not reparations are radical or routine. And guess what? In the U.S. context, they are rather routine. So we're going to amplify this theme and so many other themes. And we invite you to go along the journey with us. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you again. And let's do this again sometime.